Thanks very much. Oh, crikey, that's loud. Both Ed and David. Now, I'm conscious that I've been absolutely awful at keeping time. So I think what I'm going to do is take a page out of David's book, and rather than hog all the Q&A, I would like to open it up to the audience initially. I've got some, obviously, questions, but were there any burning questions from the audience that they would like to ask at this time before I ask a few questions of the panel? Be brave. There's a question at the back there. Oh, there's a hand waving there. Do we have a mic at all? There we go.
Thank you so much. And I think this is either for Ed or anyone else who wants to answer it. If you go through the initial hurdle of getting things approved by the MHRA and you're waiting to get, say, for example, a new software as a medical device with AI-enabled tech introduced into the NHS, what is a typical timeline associated with it? Is it 1 year, 2 years, and is there a way to fast-track it, given that you've got a 10-year roadmap already ready?
So we did have an example of this recently, and I'd have to say that the answer is probably it depends. And again, it does come back to funding for me. So recently there was quite a lot of funding that came out for AI in imaging and radiology, nationally funded, which makes that process easier. So the funding came with a deadline to spend it. It came with a route to market, and it came with a group of suppliers that we could go and talk to and access. So that, from a process, 6 to 9 months is quite quick. If we're going through something where perhaps the funding doesn't exist, the case study doesn't exist, there isn't that deadline, then it takes longer to build out the sort of what is it that we're looking for.
I think if you've got a digital technology that you're looking for a national adoption, national commissioning decision, then what you tend to find, or what I find in my experience, is that NHS England tend to rely on NICE in particular to get the reassurance that that technology has got the efficacy. So the question then is, how long does it take for the data to be available for NICE to make that assessment? Now, in fairness, NICE have started doing these early value assessments. So I was at a talk last week on orthopedics, and it was interesting that over the last 9 months, NICE have published 3 separate EVAs on different AI technology just for orthopedics. So NICE are getting better, I think, at doing early value assessments and then setting out to industry, this is the data that you'd need to now to develop for us to kind of progress our kind of guidance. If you look at, I mentioned the NICE TA process. So as a pathway, that's almost like the golden ticket. If you've got a positive TA, then there's a statutory obligation to implement that technology. But it takes about 12 to 15 months for NICE to do the TA assessment. And before then, NICE needs sufficient data for them to assess the technology. So I think if you're looking at adoption of a technology nationally, then I think NHS England are looking at NICE as being the kind of arbiter around cost effectiveness, and that takes time for the data to be collected. Equally, if you've got a digital technology that you can be onboarded onto a national framework, G-Cloud, for example, where it's relatively quick to get that technology listed, at a local level, that technology could be bought quite quickly. So you do have this combination of lots of digital technology being able to get the first sale, but if you want that technology to be scaled up nationally, then it is about collecting the data. And I think at a national decision-making perspective, it's NICE is the kind of key kind of assessor, I guess, of technology.
Thank you.
Do you have any? A hand's going up. I think he beat you to it.
Thank you, Rob. Is that on? Yes. Nick Landsman, CEO of the Health Tech Alliance. We represent about 50 health tech companies, and we also liaise and partner with lots of NHS bodies as well. Thank you very much for the presentation, very interesting. What would you say are the one or two or even three ways that industry could work better with procurement organisations within the NHS?
So for me, that's probably about getting the sort of data and the case study together. So we quite often see suppliers come to us to say that they have a fantastic solution. What we want to see in procurement to go and start that conversation with our end users is, well, what's the case study? Where have you used it before? Where's the evidence that the improvement's been made? Quantifying that improvement's really good as well. And then the other bit that helps us is, could you give us an introduction and links to those people you've been working with elsewhere? There's always a level of nervousness about being the first in the NHS. Having somebody else that you can go and talk to and reference, that's always really helpful, and I think just makes that process happen a little bit quicker.
I guess at a national level, that they ask us to engage and to help us, genuinely co-design some of this stuff. So the stuff we're trying to do at a national level is about trying to make the process easier for people like Ed and other kind of procurement teams to do the important work at that local level, that very much are locally led, centre enabled. But for the guidance and the systems that we're thinking about, it's got to work for industry as well. So, and we can't do that in isolation. We need industry to kind of help us to make sure that we don't. The risk is the centre can sometimes do things for the best intentions and then make things worse. And we need the kind of industry to kind of make sure, don't do it that way, because that'll actually add more complexity. So that would be my message.
Thanks, David. I think do we have a microphone for... Super, thank you.
I guess perhaps, James, this might be a question to yourself, would be what we talk about the adoption of technology at a local level, but then talk about optimization and value happening nationally. What work are you considering with regards to making sure that we aren't leaving value on the table but making just local decisions and looking at the whole system holistically to say, actually, these things align with our standards nationally, and we kind of want that to be more prevalent as opposed to just providing a guidance and letting whatever happen locally? How do we make sure that chasm is being bridged for key technology decisions to be almost ubiquitous, for lack of a better term, nationally, and thereby gathering more value as a result of doing so, which might happen perhaps in the medication space, but less so in med tech? Any thoughts on that?
I was going to say hypnosis, but that might not. Ed might not appreciate being hypnotized. I think there is something around technology that we're very good at adding stuff in, but we're not very good at taking stuff out. It's a bit like geology. We kind of add layers and layers and layers. And me and Robert at a workshop a few weeks ago, and we talked about. Imagine the NHS car. Imagine if the NHS was a car. You'd have one door with a electric window thing, and the other one would be manual. And in the NHS, you see that with technology. We have the old tech and the new tech alongside each other, and there is something about we do need to get better at delisting tech that isn't as effective as the new tech coming in. And sometimes when people talk about funding challenges with technology, I do kind of talk about, well, if we didn't spend money on the old tech, then that would release money for the new tech. And we do have a tendency, and I sometimes criticize some of the national framework providers because they're often like passive lists of everything. And then you see everything is bought. And even when I speak to companies, they say, actually, we supply the NHS 15 different pacemakers, but actually we think you should only need 4 or 5 pacemakers, but you insist on everything, and it actually costs us as a company more money to supply everything, the whole range. So I think part of the answer is we need to get better as a health system at delisting. I do see some interesting work coming out of, say, GIRFT, for example, Get It Right First Time, where they're beginning to look at patient pathways and look at digital technology that they think is appropriate across a pathway. There's obviously reference in the 10-year health plan around national formularies, starting with medicines. So I can see a direction of travel where you may see a move towards almost like a formulary type approach. The danger is that you make it too difficult to then introduce new innovation if you kind of so there is a balance there. But at a broad level, we do, at all levels, need to get better at delisting tech that isn't as effective in order to make room for the more effective technology.
That's really, really excellent. And I just have one question myself, and it relates to something I know that both of you feel that this is an area that needs to be addressed in terms of national strategy, strategic decommissioning, but also at a local level, Edward, you know, the pressures that you are under as a senior procurement leader, but the topic of finance and financing and funding. I mean, what's the silver bullet in that space, do we think? Particularly when we think about value-based procurement. So in the 10-year plan, it talks about multi-year financing models. How do we bridge that gap? What do you think needs to happen in that space so that, you know, sellers and industry and procurement can aim towards that value agenda? Do you want to go first, Ed?
So you've given me 4 minutes to fix the NHS finances. Wow. I think when I read the 10-year plan, that sort of move towards multi-year funding, both in terms of revenue and capital, was brilliant to read, because quite often we buy things very quickly for what's in year. So at the moment this year, I've got probably north of 25 million to spend between now and the end of March. And all of that is about how much can you get out the door before the end of March, because if you don't spend it, you lose it. And if we could move away from that, that then gives me time to do proper specs, proper procurement processes, evaluate what's in the market. What we drive at the moment and is this behaviour of you have to spend everything before the 31st of March, otherwise you have no money next year. And we do this year after year after year. So that was great to read. The bit that was then really disappointing is in that sort of framework piece that got published recently from NHS England. It said you can only do that if you are, as an ICB, at break-even or delivering a surplus, and that's got to include a 2% reduction year on year. We're 50 million short this year, 150 million short next year. We aren't going to get there. So I can't see the behaviours changing, but I sure hope they do.
I guess my perspective, I think eventually, and I think Ed's kind of alluded to it as well, is the way we actually buy is probably not optimal. So we buy a product, a device within a pathway. I think what we need to kind of move to is a health system is we buy a pathway and we buy for outcomes of that pathway. I think, to me, that's the logical answer. The reality is that we're not in that position today. I think in today's position where you do have this kind of silo budget, then I would go back to the point around we need to be more effective and assertive at delisting tech that isn't as effective. We need to kind of help recognize and assess technology on its true impact and its benefits, but recognizing the constraints that silo budgets have. You know, hopefully ICBs becoming strategic commissioners may help move systems towards looking at that pathway. So I do think there are things you can do here and now, but I think ultimately the long-term answer is we should be buying for a pathway and then the outcomes for that pathway, as opposed to buying kind of devices and technology at a point level.
And I guess just to reflect, we do have a great example of where actually the centre has done this well. Slightly disconnected from medtech, but the centre bought an e-tendering platform on behalf of the NHS, then funded it and said to 200 organisations, you can have this for free. If you don't take it for free, explain why you wouldn't. And you see people moving towards that because it's funded. So perhaps it is about how much more could we look at centrally funding.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, David and Ed. If you could join me in thanking both of these excellent leaders for their great session today, it would be really appreciated. Thank you ever so much.